The Chinese People's Liberation Army claims to have the largest artillery force in the world today. Open source intelligence estimates place them at 9,500 cannons in their entire arsenal. But exactly how capable is that hardware? How well trained are their soldiers? And how badly will this video ruin my social credit score? The United States Defense Intelligence Agency, in 2019, they put out a report called the China Military Power Report. And in their analysis, they found that artillery is the key to understanding the entire PLA ground force. This is because over 1/3 of their entire military is based around artillery. So it might be a good idea for us to check up and see what they're up to. Call for fire on the like button and then repeat on the subscribe if you want to see 2 defense videos each week. But first, if you're like me, or most people, and you wish you had a better handle on your debt, you should check out today's video sponsor, PDS Debt. They're a Google top-rated company with an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau, probably because they've helped so many people manage their debt. With customized options that consolidate debts into one low monthly payment, PDS Debt can help relieve the pressure mounting from those credit cards, loans, collections, or medical bills. Anyone with $10,000 or more in eligible debt is qualified for debt relief, and there's no minimum credit score required, and PDS Debt customizes their approach to match each individual person because they really care about helping people get out from under their debt. Getting into debt is easy, but getting out can feel like climbing out of a hole that just keeps getting deeper. The key is to make sure you're not the only one climbing. The help is out there thanks to PDS Debt. Right now, PDS Debt is offering free debt analysis, and it only takes 30 seconds. Head over to pdsdebt.com/task23 to get your free debt assessment today. When the PLA was first established in 1927, they had very limited artillery capabilities. Using what's called mountain guns or pack howitzers, they could be taken apart into smaller pieces to be transported over mountain terrain easier. However, it's not much firepower. Right after World War II ended though, the CCP straight up issued a directive to all their soldiers and citizens that they had to go out and collect shells that had been left behind by the Japanese army. Hey, are you busy on Saturday? No, it's awesome. I'm gonna be just taking a me day, gonna chill so hard. Not anymore, you're not. Go pick up artillery shells until I get tired. This grassroots campaign though, if you want to call it that, collected 700 artillery pieces and 500,000 artillery shells that had been abandoned by the Japanese. During their second civil war with the Koumintang, the CCP captured more artillery, giving them an odd hodgepodge of like Japanese, German, and American hardware that had been donated. By this point, they were very comfortable using other men's cannons. In August 1950, the PLA established their separate artillery branch officially. In April 1951, Mao Zedong wrote an inscription for them stating, quote, "Strive to build a powerful people's artillery," end quote. I'm assuming that sounded much more profound in Chinese than in the English translation, because that sounded like something I would write in a high school yearbook. Strive to be more powerful. Hope you have a great time at Sarah Lawrence. But China started to develop their own domestic cannon production with assistance from the Soviet Union. It was a super communist collaboration where I imagine they got together and shared stories about Karl Marx. This led to the licensed production of the Soviet howitzers like the M46, D-20, D-30 howitzers. Take a look at this declassified CIA document. Their analysis assessed that China's artillery manufacturing capabilities in 1949, over 1,000 Soviet and other foreign engineers, aid in the production of munitions in China. This technical aid has been instrumental in building up the capacity of the industry. The document goes on to outline in extreme levels of detail the exact location and capacity of 12 major and 58 minor production facilities in China for the production of artillery munitions. It's the kind of document that only someone with my special kind of tism would get excited about, but isn't just hardware that they got from the Soviets. Soviet artillery doctrine, tactics, and strategy was also adopted because unlike Western powers, China and the Soviet Union didn't favor air power. Consequently, artillery became their primary source of firepower. Initially, the PLA adopted Soviet 122mm and 152mm calibers for most of their gun-tubed artillery during the Cold War. In the Korean War, they developed very limited artillery assets because they didn't have that much available yet. According to Mark Clodfelter of the National War College, just in the last 3 months of 1952 alone, during the Korean War, the US and UN forces fired 3.5 million field gun shells, while the communists fired 370,000, a more than 12-to-1 disadvantage in firepower. This vulnerability is why China started doubling down on cannons after the war. By the Vietnam War in 1970s, China's artillery industry had grown exponentially, and they had the means to donate 2 million shells and 64,500 artillery pieces to North Vietnam. However, by 1979, those guns would be turned right back round on them when China tried to invade Vietnam. It's kind of reassuring to see that blowback happens to everyone. See, we share that in common. That's common ground that we can relate to with each other. Both America and China know what it's like to arm a place with weapons and then have to fight that place at a later date. But it was actually the poor performance of the PLA ground forces in this war that first spurred some major modernization efforts in the PLA artillery branch. What type of tactics were they reforming? According to the US Army's 252-page study titled Chinese Tactics, perfect titling, traditionally they preferred to centralize fires in order to maximize the effects of mass. Broadly speaking, Chinese fire support missions are conducted by tube artillery units, while annihilation, suppression, and counterfire missions are conducted by rocket artillery units. China heavily depends on rocket artillery, which is a little bit of a different point between the Chinese artillery philosophy and the American artillery philosophy. But there's a major focus for the PLA for those longer range out to 500 kilometers. But this video is going to be focused on tubed artillery capabilities. We'll do rocket artillery in the future. This next part though is bizarre, and you could never imagine it happening today. During the PLA's artillery reforms that we're talking about in the 1980s, they worked with Canadian defense engineer Gerald Bull to work on their new artillery ammo. He's famous in the artillery industry. This was the first hint of them switching from Soviet to Western-inspired artillery doctrine of precision and range. China purchased extended range ammo technology from Gerald Bull for thousands of dollars. The United States either didn't care or they looked the other way, or maybe they did care because Bull would later be assassinated in the early 1990s by an unknown intelligence agency, but that's besides the point. The reason that this is a major thing of note is because during this time, China started for the first time playing around with the idea of switching from Soviet 152 shells to the type of standard round that America and NATO uses. I'm talking about that 155. Bring me that 155 millimeter. Fast forward to 2005, and that's when China really went balls to the wall on switching to the 155. When they revealed their new PLZ-05 in 2008, it looked like they were switching over to the 155. They were coming over to the dark side. But what difference is there between the two? Which is actually better? Who would win in a Pepsi Taste Challenge, the Soviet 152 or the American 155? They're kind of essentially the same for all practical purposes, so why switch? My theory is because if you want to copy how Western artillery works, if you want to copy their dimensions and GPS precision ammo, then the best way to copy it is to use the same standard. But that doesn't mean that they don't add their own flavor onto artillery. A unique tactical requirement that the PLA has that many others do not is the desire to create a super duper long range artillery piece. That's the technical classification, super duper. A lot of people think artillery wouldn't play a major role in a hypothetical Taiwan invasion, but that might not be the case. This is because they want to reach Taiwan's shores from their own, which is about 130 kilometers or like 81 miles away from the mainland of China. This is just beyond the max range of modern tubed artillery effectiveness normally. Rocket artillery can do that, but not tubed. But we know that the People's Liberation Army is recently experimenting with giant tubed cannons, which according to defense1.com, an great article written by them by Mao Shu and Peter Singer, they noticed a publicly released contract from China, and it has since been deleted by China though, from their official weapons and equipment procurement information network, which is basically a Chinese military contract form. The contract stated that the PLA is interested in testing 203mm, aka 8-inch artillery. Defense One points out that this is a much larger gun than the 155. 6-inch guns that are currently used. The requirements are firing an 85 kilogram or like 187 pound projectile at 920 meters per second. It also explicitly says that you need to have a good record of paying taxes and social security funds in accordance with the law. I guess I'm disqualified from the Chinese defense industry now. The contract is also interested in a firm that can record the artillery shell's penetrative capabilities. This indicates that it might be meant to attack Taiwan's reinforced concrete defensive positions. But the really interesting thing to note was it was overseen by the PLA Strategic Support Force, which means there might be an effort to fire nuclear warheads. Today, 203mm cannons are mainly used by Russia with their 2S7 Pion, and America used to use it with their M110. Both were capable of launching tactical nukes. Nukes. Why did it have to be nukes? When people ask me what I'm afraid of, I tell them the truth. Water and nukes. How far can Chinese artillery max range hit out to? We don't know for certain. There was a whole bunch of rumors online in the last decade that they were able to hit 100 kilometers away with the WSB-35 munition. This would be about as far as the American Urka prototype fired. But the only source for that information available comes from a since-deleted article from WantChinaTimes.com, which must be good enough for a slightly credible mark. The article claims they got the information from a Canadian defense publication called Canwa Defense Review, but frustratingly, they did not link to that source, and I couldn't find it after hours of Googling furiously. The WS-35 is a GPS-guided shell from China. It's been around since 2012. Western shells have used this technology as well, which is called nosebleed artillery. It increases ranges by about 20 to 35%, and eye-bleed artillery increases by 50%. That's not a real thing. But nosebleed is. It does this by expelling gas into a low-pressure area behind the shell to reduce base drag. The Swedish Artillery Bureau actually was the first ones to come up with the principle of how it works. The Swedes, you can always count on them to make a solid meatball and a explosive shell. There are theories on how hypothetically the PLA might have been able to achieve this, possibly by using a small submunition on the warhead that's less lethal than your typical artillery shell, and there's less wear and tear on barrels as a consequence. There has been no official reports from China's military released on the matter yet, so we're really just playing a guessing game at this point. In March 2024, China showcased their fully tracked autonomous artillery with the SH-16. An autoloader automatically puts the shells in and the gunner fires it. These systems are also attempting to work on new digital integration. And where does that plug in? Plug it in? The PLA, like the United States, uses artillery reconnaissance vehicles to scout for and designate targets. But however, the one futuristic technology that I've seen Western countries deploy and use and prototype that China and Russia do not have an analogous system yet is that they have artillery that can shoot while on the move. Germany very recently showcased this with their new RCH-155 that we're going to do a whole video on. That system coming out soon. You guys brought that to my attention, but that's something I haven't seen China do yet. What the PLA has been doing for a long time though, since 2010, is phasing out their towed artillery in favor of more mobile wheeled artillery. The PLA has 9 different models of self-propelled artillery. 4 are tracked and 5 are wheeled. Current inventory, according to the Military Balance Report from 2023, says that the PLA has a total of 3,180 self-propelled guns, and they have 900 towed guns. So we can see the vast majority of their equipment, 2/3 of it, is still obsolete 122mm cannons that have a max range of like 18 kilometers standard. This is less than your 30 kilometers standard for your 155, 152 cannons. But I've recently learned more about towed artillery after posting my last video about the American artillery. As soon as I post a video, I always learn 10 times more information from reading the comments from you guys, because no matter how much I try to learn, there's always more I need to learn. I've learned how little I've learned. It's humbling. You humble me. @CasualArtyFan on X has pointed out that some towed artillery positions actually have a better chance of surviving FPV drone hits and counter bat, because they're now dug like 6 feet into the earth, and they're protected in a kind of a arty trench, arty defensive firing trench position. So all of this talk from officials about towed artillery potentially being obsolete and dead might be overblown. It's possible the American M777 might keep an important place in our inventory. Casual Artie on X, you should definitely follow him if you want to know more about all of that. But it's interesting to see because it kind of is the same as that conversation about, is a tank obsolete? No, the tank is not obsolete. The main battle tank is here to stay, but it might need to adjust and change a little bit. So towed artillery is getting dug in. And I think we need to take China's towed artillery seriously too. Looking closer at China's ammunition, I think we get a hint of why they switched to the 155. They have their own version of the US Army's Excalibur round that they copied, except it uses the Beidou, aka their version of GPS. China claims it has a range of 50 kilometers with a circular error probable within 10 meters. When we look back at history, China has contributed many innovations, including gunpowder, but recently they've been catching up by copying. One question everyone would like to know is how many artillery shells per year is China able to mass produce? Unlike the United States, who publicly releases those numbers, and they're required to be transparent with their production numbers to some degree, China is a bit of a mystery wrapped in a fortune cookie. The CIA probably has a pretty good idea because from looking through their detailed report from the PLA production in the 1950s, they had everything mapped out down to the tonnage of ammo produced each month. For example, they were producing about 1,100 tons each month. If we assume that a 152 millimeter is like 135 pounds a shell, my average infantryman math tells me that that's roughly 240,000 shells per year in 1955. Today, China has become a manufacturing powerhouse since then, producing 28% of global manufacturing. They have stockpiles of steel and nitrocellulose, everything you need to bake an artillery cake. I wouldn't be surprised if today Beijing is able to manufacture over 1 million artillery shells a year, but we're really just guessing at this point because it's a black box. A unique factor to consider with China's artillery is how it's split between theater commands. Your PLZ-07B, which is an amphibious artillery vehicle, and the wheeled PCL-171 are mainly deployed to the Eastern Theater due to their ability to do a Taiwan landing potentially. Meanwhile, your Western Theater Command facing toward India also have many wheeled self-propelled vehicles, because they handle that rough terrain better. Towed artillery can still be useful here because it can be airlifted into remote mountainous terrains. Again, go follow Casual Artie on X. 3 artillery brigades are stationed in Northern Theater Command, including your 78th, 79th, and 80th divisions. Today, China's military is investing heavily in air and naval power, but it still maintains an artillery-centric force structure. Although some of China's top-tier artillery units claim to have some impressive capabilities, a majority of their artillery systems are weaker and older compared to the American counterparts. The reason I find this investigation fascinating because we're witnessing both China and the United States revolutionize their artillery power right now, and we'll have to wait and see by around 2030 to see how it all shakes out. But of course, I'm going to say that I think that the United States is ahead because I'm biased. What do you expect from an average American infantryman? I try to be as objective as possible. Anyway, if you like this video and you want to learn more about artillery, check this one out here on American Systems and Strategy. I'm your average infantryman, Cappy. Thank you for watching. Signing off this net. Time now.